Hello, everyone, and welcome back. A very excited welcome back to Game for Thought. This is the first Game for Thought live stream of 2024, and I am so thrilled to have all of you out there on Twitch and YouTube in the future joining us here for this another important discussion at the intersection of ethics, games, and digital entertainment. My name is Ali Weiss. I am the ethics coordinator in international game development here at Aaaand Digital Arts and Entertainment, which we commonly call DIE. And I'm thrilled to bring another Game for Thought live stream out there into the world alongside four fantastic panelists. If this is your 15th Game for Thought that you've watched so far, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here. If this is the first time that you're tuning in, or you just passed by this video on the interwebs some point in your life, very welcome here. Game for Thought is a live stream hosted by us here at Aaaand DIE, where we talk about a different ethically relevant topic in the games and digital entertainment industry every month. The topics come from the interest of our staff. The topics come from interest of students, from comments out there as well. And this month, I'm very excited to announce that we will be covering a topic that resonates with a lot of you, I think, and a lot of our students and staff and a lot of our community. It is neurodiversity in digital entertainment. So basically, we will enter into our panel discussion quite soon. We'll have the panel discussion where we will cover some pre-submitted questions from you all, and then we will leave some time, about 20 minutes at the end, 25 minutes for an audience Q&A. Just know that throughout this entire stream, you are more than welcome to ask a question. Just make sure that you put it in the chat and put a Q beforehand so that we know it's a question and so we can post it for our panelists to get back to in just a little bit. I am thrilled to introduce our fantastic panelists for this evening. Without further ado, we have Pierre Escaich. Pierre is the Neurodiversity Talent Program Director at Ubisoft. We have Coty Craven. Coty is the project manager at Descriptive VideoWorks, also an inclusion and accessibility consultant. We have Lisanne, Meinen, PhD candidate at the University of Antwerp, looking into and researching neurodiversity in video games. And we have Aaaand, academic disability coordinator and game design lecturer at Glasgow, Caledonian University. So once again, welcome to the first Game for Thought live stream of 2024. Very honored to be joined among a very talented panel this evening, tackling the topic of neurodiversity in digital entertainment. Put your questions in the chat. Make sure you put a Q beforehand, and we'll be right back in just a second. We'll grab the panelists, and we will be right with you. Hang tight. All right, welcome back. We are joined finally with our panelists for the evening, ready to tackle the topic of neurodiversity in digital entertainment. Hello, panelists for the evening. Hello there. Great to have you here. First, before we dive into the discussion, it's always a bit more interesting when you introduce yourselves. So if we could just go around, share with the audience who you are, just a little bit about yourself briefly, that would be awesome. And Alan, I'm sorry to put you in the spot, but I see you first on my screen now. Alan, welcome.
Hey, yeah, my name's Alan. I'm a former game dev turned game design lecturer, um, and disability coordinator for the department I'm in. I was diagnosed with ADHD about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I think now. And yeah, I've been kind of sort of advocating for ADHD support for students and trying to do what we can to uh, basically help people not have the experiences I had when I was going through education. It's basically been the motivation for just about everything I do as a teacher at this point.
Awesome. Alan, it is such a pleasure to have you. And you're immediately echoing some of the topics that we touched on in our pre-panel conversation. So I'm sure we're going to get to that in just a little bit. Great to have you here. Coty, I see you next. Hello.
Hello, I am Coty Craven. I have been working in the games industry since 2013, so a little over a decade now. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 36, so a little late in the game for it to be part of my educational journey, but it's definitely impacted my career, so I am here and happy to talk about all things neurodiversity.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Coty. Great to have you here from somewhat of this neck of the woods, Antwerp. Although it is not this neck of the woods, it is across the way from Kortrijk in Belgium. Lisanne, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lisanne Meinen. I'm a PhD researcher in Antwerp at the University of Antwerp. I work on representations of disability and neurodiversity in video games. And I'm a philosopher and I do cultural studies. So I'm really looking at cultural representations. So I don't know much actually about the game industry. So I'm happy to learn more and hopefully I can offer some more philosophical perspectives on neurodiversity today.
Awesome. It's always great to have a mix of different perspectives and people from all sorts of domains. I've never made a video game myself. I I do not technically work in the games industry. So I also come from, a bit of a more psychological, philosophical background. So it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for joining. And last but not least, Pierre, welcome.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Pierre. I don't know if you see my Discord name, it's TPO, so that's my gamer name. So I'm Pierre, I'm French. I've been living in Copenhagen, Denmark, while working in Malmö, Sweden. I've been working for the same company for the last 26 years. That's Ubisoft, so I've always been in the game industry. And I'm a father of 3 kids. 2 of them have been diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And they made me realize that I was ADHD, so I'm not officially diagnosed, but I self-ID as ADHD. And 3 years ago, I launched an employee resource group initiative in Ubisoft on neurodiversity, which is now gathering 500 employees across 20 different countries, with all conditions represented, all job function, all level. And now I have an unusual job title. I'm officially Neurodiversity Talent Program Director for Ubisoft, so I have the chance to lead a dedicated HR program on neurodiversity within Ubisoft. Very pleased to be with you tonight.
It is a pleasure to have the 4 of you join us here on Twitch. Thank you. Before we jump into the nitty gritty of things, I think first of all, it might be interesting also for the audience if we first quickly define what we mean here by neurodiversity. So within the scope of this conversation, what do we specifically mean when we say neurodiversity? Whoever would like to chime in, go right ahead. Defining neurodiversity.
For me, I think that the two automatic things that come to mind are autism and ADHD, but I also tend to think of mental health as a neurodiversity too, because there's a lot of mental health conditions that can impact the way your brain functions, the way you interact with the world. So it's a pretty big umbrella, but I think it's important to include those three main topics in the umbrella of neurodiversity.
Yeah, I think if we talk about some official definitions circulating, usually we say, so first of all, neurodiversity is a social movement. And the term has been coined by Judy Singer in 1989, so it's quite recent. And in fact, it refers to the variation in the human brains in terms of sociability, learning, attention, mood, other mental function, in a non-pathological sense. For me, that's the most essential part of the definition of what neurodiversity is. So first of all, neurodiversity, it's everyone. So our brain is as unique as our fingerprint. That's what neuroscience is telling us. But the way our brain works may differ, and it follows like a Gauss curve, the bell curve. You have the neurotypical population, which means that your brains tend to function like the average population. And then you have the two extreme, and that's us. The neurodivergent folks, the atypical one. So what's happening in our brain? So instead of performing very close to the average, we are far from the average. But the medical world is seeing only what's going bad. But we have also other functions where we perform much better than the average. And that's the side of things that people doesn't know about when we talk about autism, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disorder, and other neurological conditions.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw the distinction there between neurodiversity and neurodivergence in that sense. You have the diversity, which can include everybody. You have neurodivergence, which is more likely autism, ADHD, dyslexia, some kind of processing disorder. But it is that kind of sort of spectrum, bell curve kind of structure, which is where you can get, a lot of symptoms that come with ADHD and autism. You quite often get that, oh, well, doesn't everybody get that? It's like, well, yes, but to a certain degree, and then when you combine it with all these other things, it becomes something much larger.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of you. And I think it's often used as an identity, like as meaning autism or ADHD or what else. But I think in my academic definition, I would go even farther than saying neurodiversity is a spectrum or like the bell curve idea. It's just the basic acknowledgement that there are so many different ways of functioning, like regarding like learning, perception, sociability, and none of them are in principle better than the other. Like they're all. It's just that in society we have a lot of norms that tell us how we should function, and some people differ more from those norms than others. And I think that's like the most general definition of neurodiversity I usually use. And what I like about it is that it's already a bit critical. Like it's critical of like the norms in society. Yeah, that's what I like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit it's actually quite socially focused as well. So Lisanne and Pierre, for example, you touch on the aspect of pathology, and that look, neurodiversity actually isn't what a lot of the public perceive it to be necessarily. I know that there are a lot of misconceptions out there regarding this topic. And I was wondering if, given your own experience, whether in education that we've talked about before or in the workplace, are there any misconceptions that really stick out to you, and that you would like to debunk while we're here together on this stream?
Oh, there's so many. I could list so many.
We have time, Alan.
I mean, I think the biggest one. I mean, what's really one of the things while we're on this topic is, as we're talking about misconceptions about ADHD and autism, as someone who was diagnosed very late in life, um, we have these misconceptions in us as well. Like, just automatically having ADHD didn't mean I understood ADHD. So, you know, a lot of like, and that's where I think the connection to mental health comes in. So, like, a lot of this, like, I beat myself up quite a lot for my ADHD symptoms before I got my diagnosis. But yeah, misconceptions. I mean, the one that always jumped out at me was the classic autistic people have trouble with feelings. Because from my standpoint and from what as I've been working more with autistic students and learning more about my own autistic traits, I've realized that the vast majority of autistic traits are connected to, if anything, like incredibly intense feelings about things. It's just that autism often comes with perhaps processing disorders or social disorders that mean that you display those feelings differently to other people, or you don't connect them to the same things as other people. But that is a huge one for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. And I think it also speaks to, a lot of what we see. It speaks to a lot of our community as well within higher education here at DIE. So I think, that definitely resonates here. Any other misconceptions, Pierre? I see.
One attached to our industry and to many industry. So let me tell you, someone autistic, someone ADHD, or someone dyslexic, they can do all type of job. There is absolutely no restriction. And I can guarantee you that among the people I know at Ubisoft, you can find autistic people in almost every job function. There is no limitation there. That's really important. Common misconception that make me super upset is that, someone dyslexic cannot be a game writer. Someone dyslexic cannot be a marketer. Wrong. On the contrary, some of the most brilliant writers in the world are dyslexic. You know why? Because one of the strengths of dyslexic people is their capacity to tell stories, to see the big picture, to create connection. And you want those kind of talent in your team as a game writer. And about the difficulty and the challenge to read and write, well, you have assistive technology and it's embedded in all the software we're using daily. That's one misconception, for example.
Yeah, and I think what both of you point out here is also the nuance. Like, I think a lot of people view things, and especially in the scope of neurodiversity, in black and white, but it's not so polarized. And so one thing doesn't have to mean B. Just because, for example, that you have dyslexia, for example, doesn't mean that you can't be a script writer. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's...
Oh, sorry.
Lisanne, go right ahead, and then we'll jump back to Alan.
Yeah, I think in terms of it being nuanced, a misconception is often that if we say neurodiversity, we're against like giving people a diagnosis, for example. But I think diagnoses can be very helpful for people to get the accommodations they need. So like what Pierre is saying, like people can do all kinds of things regardless of a diagnosis, yes, but there are maybe also some difficulties, and we also need to address those, and that's where a diagnosis can maybe be useful. But the diagnosis doesn't mean something bad, and that's where the neurodiversity perspective then comes in. So both addressing strengths and difficulties, I guess, would be important for me.
Absolutely. Go right ahead, Alan.
Just to kind of, actually, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but the thing with talking about, you know, the benefits that we can have from these things, I do think it's important to recognize that different people, I think this is really the heart of a lot of misunderstanding about neurodiversity. Different people sort of are expending different amounts of energy to do things and are facing different internal challenges. And a lot of especially when it comes to things like diagnostic criteria, a lot of it is based on external viewpoints on things. So this is where you get into that. One of the terms that bothers me a lot is when you get people referred to as high functioning or low functioning autistic. And that tends to be based on like how much they are achieving, how much they are doing, and you're not seeing what's going on internally. So you could have people with a brilliant support network who seem to be getting by very, very well and say, well, they're very high functioning. Well, no, actually, they're struggling a hell of a lot to get by. Or people that maybe seem low functioning, and well, that's actually they're not getting the right support, they're not in the right position. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the same as when you define success, for example. How does one define success? How does one define functioning? What criteria are you judging that off of? And that depends on it. It's so subjective. And so I think you touch on a really important point there. I'm going to jump right into one of the most asked questions from the general public when I sent out the form. If any of you had burning questions for our panelists, and this one came up over and over again, just every time worded slightly differently. But so on the work floor, we see a lot of different levels in terms of inclusivity when it comes to neurodivergent employees. And basically, this question asks about good practices. What are some ways that you have seen in your own experience working in the games industry or in education or so on? What are some good practices that you've seen with regards to advocating for neurodiverse employees, for working together with them to support them in the best way possible? Good practices, and perhaps actually something that wasn't so much of a good practice, but that you had a takeaway from. How can employers support neurodiversity in a tangible way?
Yeah, I can start maybe answering and just give one answer because there's multiple answers, but I'm sure my colleague will complete. The very first basic for me is that you need, as a company or even as a school, to establish what we call psychological safety in your team, in your building. Psychological safety, what does that mean? If you want to look at some stuff online, look for Professor Amy Manson, Harvard University. She did some talks about it. She popularized the concept in the business world. And a tiny company named Google did a 2-year research to try to determine what was making the success of their team. And the result is the number one criteria is their capacity to establish psychological safety. So what it is a situation where people in a team are not afraid to share their thought, even unfinished thought, to make mistake. They are not blamed. They are not punished for it. You feel safe being yourself. And that's the very first foundation, which is extremely difficult to put in place because it's a collective effort if you want to establish psychological safety. But you should never be blamed because you do error. Developing games, you know it as students, it's an iterative process. We are always doing mistakes, all the time, every day. So yeah, I will start with that first cornerstone. I let the other complete.
Yes, go right ahead, Coty.
I was going to throw in a what not to do. I'm not going to name any names. I've had a lot of jobs over the last several years, but one of the things, and it doesn't necessarily relate to neurodiversity, but just general accommodations. One of the things that made me feel the worst in my professional life about needing an accommodation was asking for captions and being immediately met with why they were a bad idea, why they were a security risk. So the rule that I go by is, if someone asks you for an accommodation and you're their lead, your HR, you're whatever, you're receiving this request, keep your doubt or all of the 50 reasons why it's going to be difficult to pull off, keep that to yourself. the person asking for it does not need to be made to feel worse than they already do, because 90% of the time, I would say, someone asking for an accommodation as a disabled employee, they've been made to feel bad in the past, so they're probably already nervous about asking. So anything that's said that makes it feel like, oh, I really regret that, I'm never going to do that again, keep it to yourself, keep it to other people that are not impacted by this decision, so that they don't then have that regret that, well, I shouldn't have done that. Now I'm going to get in trouble, or now I feel stupid, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe connected to that, to the individual accommodations. I mean, of course, it's important to have individual accommodations, but I'm always a bit wary of it, because it really puts pressure on individuals to ask for stuff and to maybe even disclose a diagnosis if they are not comfortable with that. So I would advocate for like making as many changes as possible that are beneficial to everyone and that doesn't depend on an individual. So examples would be like providing accessibility guides with a lot of information about the building, about how things work. Those are useful for everyone. Another example would maybe be the quiet room or a quiet space, because it can be used for autistic people, but also for breastfeeding, for example, or for prayer. Like there are a lot of things that those can be used for. So yeah, I like those examples because they're beneficial to everyone. Don't depend on disclosure.
Yeah, I think the one thing I always say in this situation sort of resonates exactly with what you guys were already saying, which is just listening to people learning to listen to people without judgment. This is something that I always press on my colleagues here, that there's always a worry with teachers that things are going to spill over from the classroom into the personal life. And, the more we do effective modern teaching, yes, there's a sort of mentorship gray area you get into. But what I always say to my colleagues is just don't worry about the why or the how, and don't suspect, don't get into that headspace where you start to think, why is a student not doing their work, or why isn't the student not providing me with the information I want, why is the student not studying. If a student comes to you in week 6 and says, I haven't been able to work for the past 3 weeks, okay, that's just leave it there. We're week 6. Okay, what are we going to deal with it? And you can be straight with them, and you can say, okay, we're halfway through the project. It's going to be kind of difficult for you to pick this back up, but let's work on that and let's figure out a plan. And you can move forward. And it's not, you don't have to get into a discussion. I don't know that you ever really do need to actually ask somebody why, or, what do you need this for? Just accept it the way it is and take it forward from there. It's relatively simple formula.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really a perfect segue into a more education-focused question. I'm sure that a lot of the people out there watching, perhaps later on YouTube when it's uploaded there, will be students. And so one of my colleagues actually submitted a question that reads, how can we help students advocate for themselves, for example, through accommodations, which we have mentioned several times already within this panel, without hitting a wall of skepticism? And this really links back directly with Alan, what you say about the why. The explanations that are asked to be given. So how can students, or even beyond employees, because I think this relates to both domains, right? How can people advocate for themselves without hitting that wall of skepticism?
If I may.
Or if they do, how do they, if they do hit that wall of skepticism, which very well might happen, how do you suggest navigating that?
I can start first by saying salute all the students listening to us who are neurodivergent. You're doing great. It's not easy. It might be tough, but what you've been achieving so far is great. Keep on going. And as you can see with us, you can end up quite nicely in the video game industry. Then we should not have to advocate, Ali. The simple fact we ask the question means there's something broken here. In a school, the mission of a school and what we are expecting as game developer from a video game school is that you learn your student to learn how to develop a game. We should all be gathered around the same objective. We want you to succeed, not to fail. So of course, the question, as Aaaand said, is that you need to understand one thing. I'm talking here to maybe school leader, teacher, or to manager, that when you think there's a performance of behavior issue, it's never a matter of will. It's always a matter of skill. And if you don't believe me, this is what neuroscience is telling you without the shadow of a doubt. So as Aaaand said, if a student is late with a work to give, ask yourself why. Turn yourself into a detective. And trust people. I mean, students are not a large group of cheaters. Employees are not a large group of cheaters. You are all committed people, passionate people. If you choose the study of doing video games, the career of working in video games, because you want to. So you need to start on a base of trust, and you need to be curious and to ask yourself, what prevents you to perform, deliver, study, work? What can I do to support you?
I mean, I will chime in with a slightly more cynical teacher viewpoint.
That's okay too.
You know, some of
We love all viewpoints here
some of
at
it,
Game for Thought.
absolutely. You know, sometimes you do encounter students where it is a willpower issue, but that doesn't mean that they lack. I mean, I always find this strange when people say that they lack motivation, because in my experience as both a game designer and a neurodiversity advocate, we all have motivation. We all have motivation all the time. It's just that the motivation doesn't necessarily align with the system that you are currently in. And it is just a case of honesty and having these honest conversations. Students who are out there that are struggling right now, a lot of times it is because you have a motivation to do things in a certain way, and you might be studying a course and it's requiring you to jump through some hoops that you don't understand why. One of the first things I would say is cross your fingers and hope that we are at a very, very good university, and you can go to your teachers and ask why. I'm amazed at how few students I have that come to me after I set an assignment and say, "Why do I have to do this?" I'm happy to explain that, because I need you to be motivated. Don't just sort of get in that mindset of blindly following everything that you're asked to do. And as teachers, we have to be aware of our students' motivation. We have to be aware that we are really in charge of the students' motivation. We have to work on the localized culture, we have to work on the environment, and we have to work on students recognizing, the connection between what we're saying in a class and that drive that, like you were saying a minute ago, brought them here, the reason that they came here to study. It kind of breaks my heart that right now I do a fourth year industry prep class, and for some of my students, it's the first time anyone has actually asked them, why are you here to study? Like, why are you, I'm talking to them about putting their CV together and saying, it's time now to figure out who you are and what you want to say to the world. And some of them are suddenly going, oh God, I don't actually know why I came here to study. So yeah, I think that's the important thing. Is it's about knowing motivation. It's about talking about motivation.
Yeah. Before the panel, we also talked about, the importance of honest conversations, as this one. Sometimes those honest conversations can be a lot more difficult than we hope or intend, and then it leads into the question of shame as well. And so for students, for game developers out there, for really, and this spreads across many industries actually, and realms, dealing with shame, feeling ashamed or of being afraid to speak to your employer about something that's critical to who you are and how happy you feel or fulfilled you feel. Do you have any tips for those people who are struggling with those feelings of shame, of guilt?
Well, it doesn't fix everything, but I think just connecting with others and like building a community, because there are so many neurodivergent students, but also employees, teachers, I think, and just connecting with everyone, I think that can already be very helpful.
I second that. This is what when I was referring to the employer source group in Ubisoft, we have an online private channel, and it serves as a safe place, and it is a place where you can feel you're not alone. And recently, that group did organize a panel discussion in French on anxiety. It was quite interesting because one of the panelists, so we had something like 200 live attendees, and one of the participants described a part of her anxiety, like she had issues every time she has to go to a restaurant or to have a meal with someone. She needs 2 or 3 days in advance. What are the different options of meals so that she can have play A, play B, play plan C? And immediately in the audience, in the chat, 5 people answered, "Oh my God, so I'm not the only one."
Yeah, I had an
Alan, go right
experience
ahead.
that at my last university where it was really a strange coincidence because it was before I got my diagnosis. But we were working with it was a very formative system. It was very feedback based. So we were having these kind of discussions about motivation, and we always would discuss with say to students that said that would disclose something, that they're autistic or something like that. And we would normally say, well, that we have a disproportionately high number of students registered with ADHD and autism in our department, and it's a long running almost joke at that point. And they would say, yeah, I'm aware of that. And I got to the point I started saying to them, but do you know who those students are? Because I can't tell you, but do you know who they are? And they would say, no. And what I ended up doing was organizing a neurodiversity club for them, which literally became a club that did nothing. And that was the goal. That actually became the beauty of the club, was that it was a place where they could come along, and there was no structure, there was no goals, there was none of the things that bothered them during the day. And by the end of it, it was basically, we had a Discord server, which I'm actually still on, where they would just get together and every now and again have a rant about how irritating neurotypical people were sometimes. But that was all they really needed, was to be able to have a space to kind of see each other every now and again and go, oh, right, yeah, there are actually quite a lot of us, rather than just sort of saying those words over and over.
But the shame issue is quite big. Don't have solution, but you're not alone. I rely on a community for sure. And then maybe a way to address the topic with others who are skeptical is to focus more on facts and needs. And there is one accommodation on Earth which is universally accepted and never challenged by anyone. It's this. Glasses. No one will think to ask a student or a co-worker, why do you wear glasses? This is unfair toward the other who doesn't have glasses. Why do you have such an advantage? Oh my God, you're cheating. So that's how all type of accommodation must be treated. Like glasses. You're wearing glasses because elsewhere you cannot see correctly. So you cannot do your work, you cannot perform, you cannot do anything. End of the talk. Sorry.
Yeah.
Someone in the comments says, I want to wear glasses because they look nice. Thank
nice.
you. Thank you very much. I hope you like my glasses.
But all the argumentation you made here, like, oh, I need noise cancelling headphone. And then all the argumentation against it, replace noise cancelling headphone by glasses. And then they will look and sound completely stupid and unacceptable.
Yeah, It's a really interesting analogy, Pierre. I've never heard that before, by the way. So yeah, it's really interesting food for thought. We talk about for example, the importance of community. We've talked about so far students who are in a community of both other students and teachers. We've talked about working in a company. I'm thinking about, because for example, we have an independent game development track here at DIE. So I'm thinking about indie developers, for example, or a student who wants to graduate and start their own game studio, and navigating neurodiversity within that kind of space where they are solo devs or they're working in a very small team. Regardless of maybe if any of you have any experience working solo or as an indie, any tips there you can think of when you're maybe not surrounded by a lot of other people and at the beginning?
Yeah, I
Well,
think that it all comes back
go ahead.
to oh, sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
We'll start with Coty and then we'll go back down to Lisanne.
Okay. I think in that situation, it all comes back to, again, networking with people and making sure that you're surrounded by people that can empathize with you and that might find themselves in similar situations, because, it's interesting because it's something that a lot of disabled people have lived with forever, like being isolated like that. And a lot of people discovered it for the first time when COVID hit back in 2020, and it became this thing that everybody was talking about. And a lot of the disabled community was like, well, yeah, that's every day. There's nothing new about it. So if you can find people that are in a similar situation, or even people that have been doing it for a lot longer than you have, that can share their insights and what they've learned and how they've kind of taken themselves out of their protective little bubble to network with more people and have more experiences with diverse people, then I think you're really setting yourself up for a much better indie experience.
Yeah, that really ties into what I wanted to say. Like I've experienced in the academic world with a mentorship scheme where like more advanced neurodivergent academics would be mentors of like PhD students who were also neurodivergent. And of course, academic work is very individual as well. And it was really nice to learn from each other, but in a more informal way. So just sharing experiences of how to navigate conferences and stuff like that. So it would be really great if something like that could happen for the game industry as well, I guess. Yeah.
I think in the indie scene and smaller team, you have the opportunity. I think what is really important is to try to get to know yourself. And then if you are in a small group, that's an excellent opportunity to focus on listening to the other people, asking them questions. What do you prefer? How do you prefer to communicate? Are you at ease with using your voice, or do you prefer text chat? Are you at ease with webcam, or you don't like webcam? Do you like spontaneous desk visit, or you hate that? Tell me what you prefer in terms of communication, but also feedback and collaboration. And then you give yourself the chance in a small group of 2, 3, 4, 5 to really listen to the other and to adapt to each of those. And for me, this can be applied also in huge companies, because the reality of huge companies, it's a compilation of small team of 5 people.
Yeah, I used to, when I was teaching team working, I always used to make a point of talking about culture and localized culture. And I actually used to do a workshop based on the book The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, where I would walk students through various dichotomies that Erin Meyer presents in culture, which were things like reactions to feedback, methods of communication, etc. And it worked very well for me because I had a very international group of students, and so I would ask them to give me results or like to fill in a survey as we were going of what their preferences were, and then I could show them live data afterwards, and immediately they would like, you would have there would be one about, do you prefer an egalitarian or I forget the polar opposite, But do you prefer to make decisions as a group, or do you for a top-down structure where we make decisions? And you could see the split in the results, and they could immediately go, oh, that's why our projects aren't working, because none of us can agree on what the right way to make decisions is. And you're right, the smaller the team, the more control you have over the localized culture, and the more you can actually talk about the localized culture. It's something I'm going through with my fourth years right now, is getting them to think about, they're about to go out into the world, obviously under the current circumstances, not got a great choice in where they're going to end up. It's kind of like cross your fingers and hope that there's still vacancies out there. But at least be aware when you're going into a company culture whether you're going to fit in or not. The response to sort of what you would do for people that are going to start their own companies that I was going to give, I was going to be cynical and just make sure that you're ready for that, because not everybody can do that. It's something that's taken me years to kind of live with myself. And it's actually really since my ADHD diagnosis I've kind of started to accept limitations a lot and realize that, I have designer friends who make tiny little games, just wonderful games that you can sit down and you can play, and they're fun and they're a whole structure. And I don't do that. And for years I kind of looked at myself as like, I'm a lesser designer. But what I do is I make little prototypes and I tinker, and it turns out I'm kind of more of a systems designer than I thought. I couldn't start a company by myself right now. I'd need a gameplay person to sit alongside. And I probably also need a business person. I've realized that a lot of my anxiety is connected to money. I couldn't possibly imagine having to balance the books for a company alongside doing game dev. So know yourself, but know your limitations and know what it is you're capable of dealing with.
Yeah, I think knowing yourself also, or really getting to know yourself, because of course this is a lifelong process here. It's a recurring theme of this conversation, and I hope for those of you watching, even listening to this conversation right now is triggering some interesting thought points for you that maybe will sink in within the next few days or weeks. I want to switch gears a bit to representation within game content. And so I have a question here from a student that reads, how can game developers ensure accurate and positive representation of neurodiverse characters and experiences within games? Just out of curiosity also, so what are some good practices, I guess, of representation here? And where does the industry stand today regarding representation?
I think
in the scope of, go ahead, Lisanne.
No, I think one thing that often goes wrong is that neurodiversity is represented from an outsider perspective. So what it looks like to outsiders, and that's connected to like the pathology paradigm or like a medical perspective on what it is, but representing something from an insider perspective. So how would autistic people or ADHDers describe their own experiences in their own words? That's often completely different. And I think how you can incorporate that in games would be through participatory design, maybe. So involving people from as early as possible, I guess, in the design process, in making the game. And if that's not possible because you don't have a budget for that, then maybe, I don't know, just go on TikTok and watch how people tell about their experiences. I don't know. There are many ways to access lived experience accounts, I guess, of neurodiversity.
And you don't have to look far away, because UK, the trade body of the video game industry in UK, did twice a census on diversity topic. And the latest census reports that more than 18% of actual video game developers self-ID as neurodivergent. So start by listening your team members, because in every game team around the world, I can guarantee you you have neurodivergent thought. Just let them be who they are, listen to them, and be genuine in your approach. Ask questions, as you say. Indeed, do your homework. Like you should do as a game designer, as a narrative writer, do your homework. You're in a video game school right now, you're learning that. That's important. Do your research, ask questions, and in your own team, you have experts.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's absolutely
Alan.
it. Doing research is the key part. I'm the one I always bring up, and thankfully have never had to really intervene with anything in this regard. But the one I always give as an example is, Afro-Caribbean hair. We're typically terrible with Afro-Caribbean hair in game development. Just go to talk to somebody that actually has it and say, hey, can you explain what it's like, where as it grows, what kind of shape does it have? Can we talk about this? And there's some great guides that have been produced for these things. For neurodivergent representation, I haven't seen a lot of good neurodivergent representation in media in general at all. We're getting to the stage where there's been a few representations of autism that have sort of clicked relatively well. The thing I'd always ask is why you feel the need to add it is a big part. Like, make sure you're adding it for a good reason. Make sure it brings something to the table, as everything in the design should. And don't just think that it's a cute way to make a character more relatable or anything like that.
Are there any examples that you can think of games that are out there on the market that have what you would call authentic representation of neurodiverse characters?
Yeah, for me, the most impressive representation work done is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice on Senua is psychotic. And the experience is amazing because for me, it's going beyond representation. Representation, as a neurodiversity advocate, I would tend to say, cool to do representation, but that's not enough. I want more. I want us to drive acceptance. And us, the video game industry, the video game developer, we have that power because we deliver interactive experience where we can offer to the player to go in the shoes of someone else, to go in the brain of someone else. So today, I'm not satisfied with what the industry at large is doing in terms of representation of minorities. We're too shy. We're not taking our responsibility because we are the most popular and the most impactful medium nowadays. We can really drive acceptance. Why? Because instead of sharing with you a passive representation that can offer you the possibility to be someone being dyslexic, someone being psychotic, someone being on the spectrum, someone being ADHD, someone being part of this minority group, and so on, and literally live this experience. And that's life. And the interest, what is interest? It's to represent life. We put some life into our game.
I think I would agree. I mean, I definitely agree with the final point there that, we are trying to create digital simulacra of life, essentially. And that is our goal. I think we have to tread carefully as a medium with saying that, you can experience anything within a video game, because ultimately what you're creating is a digital system. And there's limitations to how much digital systems can represent subjective concepts. And straying off the subject, I have this issue with relationships all the time. The way that human beings are portrayed in video games in terms of relationships has to at some point break down into a digital structure. There has to be thresholds for behavior, and it's not really how behavior actually works. And so it does. Yeah, it makes me slightly uncomfortable when people start trying to push mental health into this kind of sphere, because I think there's some aspects of the things that we go through that can't be broken down into a digital structure. So yeah, and I feel, yeah, that's where you end up with that sort of the classic trope of the indie game that is about, supposedly about depression or about the person's struggle with whatever, and at the end of the day, it's like, I see where you were going with this, but at the end of the day, what you've made is a third-person combat game where you hit something with a stick over and over again. It's not actually got that much to do with what you said you were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would also be my stance on like these empathy games or simulation games. That, I mean, the attempt is good. I think we should always aim for like making people empathize with neurodivergent people through games, but maybe be a bit, I don't know how I would phrase it, but don't overestimate. Also, don't overestimate what these games can do, but still try it anyway. Like both of these things. Yeah.
That's interesting. I understand the cautiousness. I'm assuming I'm a bit more extreme there because, we're talking about ADHD. Some of us were familiar with ADHD. I'm desperate about the ocean of bad representation of ADHD everywhere in the world. I can see what is being discussed on ADHD in every country where we're present, and it's exactly the same thing. We are the lazy people. We are the bad people. If there is a delay in diagnostic, it's because of us, because we're watching too much TikTok and we want to get diagnosed. Come on, that's bullshit. There is 2 years delay to get a diagnosis everywhere in the world. You know why? Because we massively underinvested in mental health and there's not enough specialists, and that's all. And I know people personally who've been saved because they watched TikTok and they discovered what was the source of their anxiety. And that's good. So sorry, I'm a bit passionate here, but
Hey, that is so important. That is exactly why.
I'm striving for positive representation of ADHD in any kind of media, and especially in a video game, because I'm still waiting for it, because it still does not exist, and we are 5% of the world population.
Yeah. I'm gonna get back to that, Pierre, because what you said triggered another question that wasn't pre-submitted, but it popped into my mind. But I'm gonna get to that in a second. I see a question in the chat. By the way, you are more than welcome, if you're watching, to put a question in the chat. If you're wondering anything, want your voice to be heard in this discussion, put it in the chat. Just put a Q beforehand, and we'll ask away. It's time for some audience questions. So this one reads, what are your thoughts about letting your employer know about your neurodivergency? Would you mention it on a solicitation, or when would be a good time?
So having just gotten out of a 5-month-long job search, I kind of have mixed feelings about disclosing any disability before you have the job. Like, obviously, if you're interviewing for something and you have accommodation needs, then yes, you have to bring it up. If you're deaf, hard of hearing, you need captions for your Zoom interview, you have to ask for them. Ideally, they will ask if you need any accommodations, but that's not often the case, unfortunately. But it really depends on kind of the and this probably isn't the most helpful thing to say, but the vibe you get from the person you're talking to. Like, is the community at that employer supportive, or is it going to be something that not necessarily is used to hurt you, but it like is a mark against you in some way? Because unfortunately, we do still see a lot of that, because there is still so much misunderstanding around neurodiversity, neurodivergence. Because again, everyone has said we're seen as the bad people, the people that are difficult to work with, the lazy people. So I think you really ask around. I think find people that work there now, see how they feel about the matter, see if they've posted on LinkedIn or something about their experience at work, and kind of build your own approach from the research that you've done.
Yeah, I think asking around and asking the employees who are currently there is a brilliant recommendation there.
And again, what is important to say that first of all, disclosing or not disclosing, that's a personal choice and a personal journey. You don't have to disclose. It's really your choice. And then you should know that legally speaking, in almost every country in the world, it is perfectly illegal for an employer to ask you to disclose. Let me be clear about that. Almost everywhere. So you are not forced to disclose. And as you were saying, I think, Coty, what is very interesting is that in a modern recruitment process, good recruiters now, they are open. They should focus on your skill. They should pay attention to if you need any kind of accommodation so that you have a good job interview. If you have in front of you a recruiter who is not liking at that, be aware that they have no idea of inclusion and accommodation. So if you are hired, it's at your own risk. For me and for our recruiter today, my main colleague working on the program is a lead recruiter, and she's dyslexic, Meinen. Sorry, I'm losing what I wanted to say, typical. Sorry, I pass it on. I forgot my.
It'll come back to you. It'll come back to you, Pierre. And it's funny because honestly, remember like 20 seconds ago, I said I had a question popped up in my mind for you. Guess who already forgot that question? Me. So, so we can just keep going. But I had a question about recruitment as well, because there was a question that was pre-submitted about the recruitment and hiring process.
Yeah.
And ways that that process can be more inclusive and supportive to neurodivergent applicants. I know, for example, like we have students that are now on their internships, and soon they will be graduating and then entering the industry, hopefully. The recruitment process and hiring process, any like views there on how that could be more inclusive?
Yes.
I think we
Go on, Coty.
just quickly, I think we have to kind of throw away our old notions of recruitment before everything was done from Zoom. Like I've seen so many LinkedIn posts and job search guides that talk about eye contact during your interview. Who are you going to make eye contact with on Zoom? You can't look at the camera and then also look at the person. So what are you making eye contact with? And for a lot of neurodivergent people, eye contact is not really a thing that we are super comfortable with. Like I always struggle myself, like, okay, I'm making eye contact, I'm making the effort trying to look normal so that I fit all of these perfect criteria. How long am I supposed to look? When do I blink? And then you have this whole thought process and you panic spiral because you're just trying to make eye contact because you've been told so many times. And then you end up looking creepy, and it's just, let's get rid of the antiquated in-person, face-to-face, and frankly, ableist notions of recruiting and hiring, and see what people need to feel welcome and safe in interviews.
Yeah, I think we've been completing the training of our recruiter, and a modern recruiter nowadays, they are looking for culture add, not culture fit. Culture add means there are skills we don't have on board. We want to complete that by adding new skills. Then they need to focus on skills exclusively. Eye contact or analyzing the body behavior is irrelevant, completely irrelevant with business. And a well-trained modern recruiter knows it. So again, an interview is going both ways. You are also interviewing the company who wants to recruit you. So ask questions and test whether they are inclusive or not.
That's kind of the advice that I give to students in these situations is whenever I've been asked, should you disclose anything, I always say, well, it depends on the situation. If you're in a position to potentially turn down the job, then that gives you the comfort to say to yourself, do I want to work somewhere where I feel like I can't say how I operate. It's really funny to hear you talk about focusing recruiters on what matters, because that has been my crusade in education recently, is getting people to focus on what matters. You know, we're currently talking at the moment. I'm currently talking with my colleagues about what we do with our fourth year honors projects, and we're asking this question of, well, you know, why do they have to hand in a 3,000 word paper? At what point in the game development process do you have to write a 3,000 word paper about what you were actually just doing?
This is not accessible. Who's going to read that?
Yeah, there's a plenty strong argument that you as a developer will have to explain what you're doing and talk with other people about what you're doing. But you know, there are only certain situations where you would have to even do that in a formal presentation format. And even then, only for certain roles. You know, the most you'll probably have to do is either a stand-up or a submission of work through Jira or something like that. So yeah, I think that's absolutely it. I think for both education and recruiters, it's focus on what really matters and what you're really asking for. It's kind of coming back to that honesty thing, and just being honest about why we're here and what we're looking for.
I think one last comment, sorry, is that you may test if the company is inclusive, but if you see positive signs that the company is inclusive, it does not mean everyone in the company is acting inclusively. Okay. And I'm sorry, for me, I'm working for a game company. We're huge. I cannot guarantee you and tell you that our 19,000 colleagues are great, inclusive people. We are all human. There is no bad people that I know. But if we have a program, it's because we feel the need to get better. Some people just lack knowledge and understanding, and they are clumsy, not on purpose, deliberately. They are ableist because they don't know, because they don't have the knowledge. So a company as a whole could show you good signs of inclusivity, but maybe you're going to end up in a team which is not very inclusive.
I think you've made a really good point there about people can seem like they're being exclusive, but you have to remember that they are often coming from an uninformed standpoint. I went through the exact same thing, dealing with what one of my students came to me a while ago to say was transphobic behavior from some of my colleagues, and I thought, how on earth could my colleagues be transphobic? Like, we're always supportive of our trans students. And it was simply a case that they were trying to change their given name within one of the structures. And one of my colleagues was saying no, because he didn't actually even realize why the name change was being requested, and thought it was just a general request. He was like, you realize how much work I have to do that? And I said to him, well, you realize this person has just transitioned, and it immediately went, oh, right, okay, yeah, I'll change the name.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think a big piece of it also, because honestly, and about honesty in conversation, I teach a course to, and maybe some of the students are watching right now, to all of the first year students here, about career skills. And I am going to admit here that in that, we had a presentation about, to be honest, I forget the topic even, but maybe it was about networking. I can't remember. And I included information about eye contact. I listed it as one of the things to like look out for or to hold as important. And I'm glad, honestly, that a student raised their hand, and like also is very brave, because it's an aula of 300 students, I think, and said, look, like, what about, we have many students here are neurodiverse. And I immediately completely understood that viewpoint, and I changed it on the slide, because I think also a big part of this conversation is admitting that we're also always learning. And sometimes we do things that are actually not as inclusive as we think. Yeah, for me personally, that was something. Yeah, I'm just very glad that student said what that student said, because it taught me a very important lesson. Yeah, but I think we just also have to allow other people to learn as well.
And it's interesting what you say, because we can make a direct connection with your school and video game school. You have students in design, and there is one concept you may study, and I encourage you to study. It's universal design and accessibility. Just follow that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll do an accessible world for everyone. And we don't care about label. With some colleagues, I'm used to say, we have a curse. To introduce the topic of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, we use the label. But I don't believe in label, because labels put you in boxes. And it drives you to say, oh, but you don't look very ADHD, because my cousin is ADHD and he's not acting like you at all.
Yeah.
Forget about that. Like, yeah.
We could continue to talk about this for like many hours. I can imagine. I can't believe I just looked at the clock and it is already 9:15. I just want to have some final thoughts, final words from you for about the topic. Anything you would like to share to the audience? Any advice that you would give to people who are watching, whether they're game devs, whether they're working in animation or VFX, students, beyond? Any advice?
Well, I would maybe like to add a critical note, and it's not very positive to end with, maybe, but like we've been talking a lot about like the strengths of neurodivergent people and like the skills they have, and I think it's great that there's so much more attention to that, but it also makes you vulnerable to exploitation in a way, I guess, if there's so much focus on your special skills and your strength. And I think anyone, like students but also employers, like anyone, should also be aware of the risk of exploitation, I guess. That would be my my very positive end note.
Hey, but it's a very important critical point, and it hadn't been mentioned yet, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Lisanne. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Anyone else? Pierre, I see you on my screen next. If you have any last
sure.
words?
I would say a few things to all of you, especially students. Whether you are neuroatypical or neurotypical doesn't matter, but a few things. People who are a bit atypical, you should know that we are experts in living outside of our comfort zone. So when you're working in a game team and you're constantly face new challenge, because this is what it is, game development. It's exploring the unknown permanently, right? You need people who are great at leaving their comfort zone. So contrary to what many people think, we are experts because this is our daily life, because the world around us is not made for us. So when someone is saying, oh, but if I provide you accommodation, I'm not going to encourage you to leave your comfort zone. No, wrong. You are not leaving your comfort zone. I'm living constantly outside of it. That's the first thing. And then something that might echo what has been shared here in this panel, in any kind of conversation, is that be open, be curious, listen, ask questions. It's okay to don't know. If someone is sharing to you, hey, you know what, I'm autistic. Answer, oh, I don't know so much about autism. Can you tell me more? Thanks for sharing first. And then please, when you discuss with someone, the most inclusive communication tips you can apply is when someone is telling you something, always acknowledge. Never minimize. If I come to you and I say to you, I'm stressed, don't tell me, don't worry, it will get better. Because I take it as, okay, you don't want to talk about it. Always acknowledge, especially when you don't understand and you disagree with. That's the basis of any kind of communication and collaboration. Never minimize the experience of others.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Very powerful last statements there. Appreciate it a lot. Alan, hello there. I see you next on my screen, dear Alan.
Yeah.
Any last words to share?
Yeah. I think Pierre just said most of it there. Really. I know that we can't say with 100% certainty why our fields attracts so many neurodiverse people, neurodivergent people, I should say. But I think that you can draw some parallels there where it's our field is about creativity, and creativity is born from diversity. It's born from biases and breaking biases and thinking differently to other people. And so you do have to embrace all the diversity of experience and diversity of feeling, diversity of emotion that is around you at all times. I also think, I teach fundamental game design, and when you break game design itself down into what we're doing, it's all about motivation. Ultimately, a lot of it is, it sounds kind of dark when I say it this way, but a lot of what we do in game design is basically controlling people, compelling people, and pushing people, but for good reason, to try and help them have fun and try and help them enjoy themselves. So, I think that's where the connection comes from. So I think it is important to keep thinking about motivation, keep thinking about why are people the way they are, why are people working, and listen to other people talking about their motivations. Get to know motivation, because it's such an important part of what we do in game design. Yeah, and then the only way to create these kind of psychological safe spaces is to be honest with each other, to listen to each other without judgment, and to just believe people. I think that's the thing I tend to try and finish this on. Just even if somebody says something to you that sounds absolutely absurd, it pays so much more to believe that person and assume they're acting from a place of truth than it does to assume that they're lying. Because even if they're lying, if you're working with them, just carry on with things. There's no need to, don't question them, just carry on. So yeah, just listen and believe people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan. Last but not least, Coty. Hello there.
Yeah. Trying to think of something we haven't covered yet, but the only thing coming to mind is the industry kind of sucks right now. I think everyone is aware of that. And I imagine it is a very frightening place to be trying to enter as a recent graduate or a new graduate. But I think that knowing how many, especially if you're a neurodivergent student or recent grad, knowing how many of your peers are in this industry hopefully will make it less intimidating and less kind of a miserable place to be, because in addition to the work that you do, you will build some of the best connections that you will ever make in your life when you find your people in the industry. So find your people. That's it.
That's like a wonderful point, I think, to close it out on. Thank you so incredibly much, Coty, Alan, Lisanne, and Pierre. It was such a pleasure to have you here, and an honor, truly. Big love in the chat and appreciation and acknowledgement for these 4 fantastic human beings. And if you're still watching out there, hang tight. Just for another minute or so, and I'll be back to announce the next Game for Thought stream, which actually is coming a lot sooner than you might expect. So hang tight. I will get you the information about the next Game for Thought stream, the rest of the schedule of the season. Hang on. We will be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We really hope that you enjoyed tonight's live stream and that you, had a lot of takeaways from this conversation. I know that I did personally. Feel free also to check out the blog posts about many of the previous Game for Thought live streams, and also about this one. It should be available soon. So take a look at the website of the Flemish Games Association to read those blog posts, a really nice text recap of the live streams that we have done this season. And I'm very excited to announce that we have another Game for Thought stream coming up in March. So March 2024 is the month of 2, not 1, but 2 Game for Thought live streams. Really pumped to welcome you back on the 20th of March, Wednesday, the 20th of March, where we will be discussing the topic of religion in games. So be sure to mark your calendars for that one. Of course, a big thank you once again to our panelists, Aaaand, Lisanne, Pierre, and Coty. This conversation wouldn't have happened without you. Big thanks, of course, to HOEST, DIE, the Flemish Audiovisual Fund, Flanders Game Hub, the Flemish Games Association, and Elevate. Big thanks to our moderation crew as well for helping out there in the chat. Thank you. Yes, of course. Bradley, Casper, and all of the crew helping out there. Thank you. Much appreciated. And please join us in just a couple weeks for the next Game for Thought stream. I hope that you continue to have these conversations with your colleagues, with your peers, with your fellow students. Feel free to share and continue these conversations about important topics in the games industry and beyond. This was Game for Thought. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Have a great evening. Bye, everyone.